We're starting with Raw, and Rhea Ripley kicked off the show from Austin, Texas to address recent events, including what happened at SummerSlam and her emotions dealing with the betrayal. Ripley then turned her attention toward Liv Morgan and Dominik Mysterio and vowed to decimate them both before being interrupted by WWE's resident Bonnie and Clyde. Morgan handed the mic to her daddy Dom, who explained his betrayal, saying he deserved to be treated like a man, and accused Ripley of being bossy and forcing him to call her mommy. Mysterio also credited Liv Morgan for a lot of things, including helping him beat his father Ray, though Ripley said it was her desire for Dominik to beat Ray on his own. Ripley applauded Dominik for standing up for himself, but launched into a scathing attack on Liv, saying she snatched Dominik, the women's world title, and her Judgment Day family. As the verbal back and forth ended, Damian Priest showed up behind Liv Morgan and Dominik Mysterio, with the Terror Twins launching an assault on the heels. Ripley chased Morgan to the back, leaving Priest to beat down Dominik all the way to the ring, but Carlito made the save, but got a beating himself as Raw kicked off on a huge note. In a video obtained by fans, a terrified Liv Morgan can be heard screaming and running as Rhea Ripley chased her throughout the backstage area. Later on, both emerged back in the ring, and Ripley and Priest cleared house and sent the new Judgment Day in retreat after Priest defeated Carlito in a match. Their match started once WWE's resident Apple enthusiast showed up to help Dom, and they fought through 2 commercial breaks, though they had less time than it sounds. That's because the majority of the action took place during the breaks, and Priest's win was predictable, as was the post-match attack by the Judgment Day. Ripley ran down and kicked Carlito below the belt before taking out JD McDonough, though there was a concern that was prevalent throughout the match. Carlito was able to get through that match without any issues, but it was spotted by fans that he was wearing a support on his shoulder and that his hand was heavily taped. Carlito is minimizing the use of his shoulder for the moment, but it could be an injury that heals on its own, or, like Ripley, the wrong bump could make things worse. Only time will tell what's next for the Judgment Day member, but he may not be massively active in the ring if this situation doesn't improve soon. In fact, this setback could keep Carlito from traveling to Bash in Berlin, where Dominik Mysterio and Liv Morgan will face Damian Priest and Rhea Ripley. Reacting to the match announcement in an interview with Kathy Kelly, Rhea promised brutality in Germany, while Damian said the Judgment lame couldn't take them out. But what did you make of the Judgment Day angle on Raw? Are you excited for the mixed tag team match in Berlin? Share your thoughts down below. This week's Raw set another example of Rhea Ripley being one of WWE's most popular superstars today, and her social media engagement also demonstrates her popularity. With that in mind, it was surprising to see Ripley be on the receiving end of what chants this week during her promo to open the show. As she spoke about Dominik Mysterio, taking a dig by saying it just wasn't deep enough, Ripley received the chant as heard in plenty of fan-recorded videos from the show in Austin. It's surprising that Ripley of all superstars received the chant, which is normally reserved for talent fans aren't big fans of, and is often done by a bored crowd entertaining themselves. With that said, we've seen the what chant be delivered to babyfaces if they take too many breaks in their promos, with Stone Cold Steve Austin's promos often being met with what? Surprisingly, fans in the arena also heard some boos during Rhea's segment. Is this an indication that fans are indeed behind the heels Dominik and Liv Morgan? Wade Keller informed that backstage, in the gorilla position, Bruce Pritchard, Triple H, and the creative team were equally surprised by the fans' reaction. It looks like WWE creative heads and the fans will have to wait and see if the reactions continue, or if this is just a one-off. What do you think? Are you, as fans, rooting for Liv and Dom, or are you behind Rhea Ripley? Sound off in the comments below. At SummerSlam, the Judgment Day as we knew it imploded, and after the exits of Rhea Ripley and Damian Priest, more changes could be coming. WrestleVotes reports that a planned rebrand is underway, and that the essence of the group will stay the same, but a name change is likely to happen. The leading candidate when it comes to new names is Street Trash, a phrase that Gunther had used to describe Damian Priest ahead of their match at SummerSlam. Back then, Priest was still a member of the faction, and the term reflects the real-life struggles the Archer of Infamy has been through before making it to WWE. This proposed name has left everyone scratching their heads as to why WWE would go with it, as going from the Judgment Day to Street Trash is seemingly career suicide. It's a frankly stupid name that is only connected to someone who's no longer in the group and is close to being akin to the faction name of the Filthy Animals in WCW. That faction consisted of Conan, Rey Mysterio, Billy Kidman, Eddie Guerrero, and valet Tori Wilson, all fine talents, but the ridiculous name was hard to get past for many. As Prince Devitt, Balor led the original version of the popular Bullet Club faction and could make a whole new club out of this new group rather than going with street trash. Mixing the names of the Judgment Day and the prominent NJPW stable, calling it Judgment Club, would at least be good rather than the name WWE is reportedly favoring. A Judgment Club led by Balor could give them a more aggressive edge, similar to the initial stages of the Bullet Club in 2013, which immensely elevated Balor's status in wrestling. Some online have coined the Other Side as a faction name, which is a nod to the group's theme and reflects a different side of the group now that Ripley and Priest aren't around. But what do you think of all this? Are you opposed to street trash? Do you have a better name in mind? Sound off in the comments down below. In a backstage segment, Drew McIntyre confronted Adam Pearce, who said that CM Punk was having travel issues and wasn't there, so he didn't know what he could do for Drew. The Scottish Warrior wasn't there about Punk, but wanted to know why SmackDown's Randy Orton was getting a title match with Gunther and a shot at Raw's top prize. McIntyre said Orton did nothing for months after he was screwed in Saudi Arabia, and it left people wondering what he was going to do next, referring to the controversial King of the Ring finals. McIntyre said he knows Randy very well and proceeded to call him a snake in the grass, but said he wouldn't sit back and let Orton strike on his turf just because he was screwed one time. Orton came out on Raw to hype up his Bash in Berlin showdown with Gunther, which brought out the Ring General, which began a battle of psychological warfare. Orton didn't seem to mind the World Heavyweight Champion calling out his wasted potential. He had an issue when Gunther called Orton's grandfather and father screw-ups. McIntyre's music hit, which allowed for Orton to hit an RKO on a distracted Gunther, but as Drew was distracted by what was happening, CM Punk jumped in from the crowd and attacked. Punk took McIntyre's belt and whipped him with it until Drew fled, and backstage, Punk admitted to lying about the travel issues to orchestrate his surprise attack. Punk's reasoning was if McIntyre knew Punk was around, Drew would leave, and spoke about the bracelet McIntyre stole from him that has the names of Punk's wife and dog. Discussing the belt, Punk said it's given him an idea that will make everyone happy, and all signs point to a strap match between the two in the near future. If that provides more of a grudge match feel than their SummerSlam meeting, that's great, and this was a good segment as it addressed two different feuds without feeling forced. McIntyre later took to his ex to drop a photo of his bruised back covered in scars from the whipping he suffered at the hands of CM Punk. The feud between Punk and McIntyre is far from over, but the story of Orton and Gunther is just heating up, and perhaps we'll see a tag match pitting Gunther and McIntyre against Punk and Orton. It'd certainly make for a huge main event for next week's show, and would you like to see said match? Let us know down in the comments. For decades, Randy Orton has been a WWE superstar and is one of the company's top names today, and fans can expect to see him around for a long time to come. Fightful Select reports that WWE sources claimed Orton has signed a new deal with WWE, which is believed to be a 5-year contract that'll keep him with WWE through to late 2029. Orton's previous 5-year deal signed in 2019 would have kept him with WWE until late this year, though he did miss 18 months due to a back injury from May 2022 to November 2023. With that in mind, there had been speculation that WWE might extend his old contract to cover the missed time, but instead, they opted for a fresh agreement for the Viper. A WWE executive noted that given the significant changes in guaranteed money, live event schedules, international tours, media duties, and social media responsibilities since Orton's last deal, it made more sense to negotiate a new deal rather than extend his old one. By the time Orton's new deal expires, he'll be 49, and with another 5 years, one has to wonder if the 14-time world champion could reach, or even eclipse, the coveted 16 title record. Not too long ago, Shane McMahon had a meeting with Tony Khan to discuss future possibilities, which has led many to believe that WWE's prodigal son will soon be all elite. While speaking to Cultaholic, MJF addressed the speculation about a potential match with Shane McMahon and said it to be bad for McMahon's well-being. Whether it's a verbal confrontation or an actual wrestling match, MJF admitted that while he would find the experience enjoyable, he might also feel bad for McMahon. Reacting to a photo of McMahon and Khan at their meeting, MJF made his views clear on Shane, and they were far from flattering. He said, "He is a f***ing mark. I mean, yeah, that was my reaction. I don't respect either of them. I respect the fact that I'm the highest paid athlete in my company, rightfully so. Outside of that and the money stuff, I don't know, man." What's your view on what MJF had to say about Shane McMahon possibly facing him in AEW? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. In the same interview, MJF addressed the reports of his backstage confrontation with Britt Baker, which led to the former AEW Women's World Champion briefly being suspended. The reigning AEW American Champion argued that it's okay not to get along with everyone at work, but he thinks the story has been blown out of proportion. MJF questioned the authenticity of the online reports, saying that if he had really barged into a woman's locker room, yelled, and threatened her by punching a wall, he'd be suspended, and that's common sense. MJF added that he thinks much of what was said about the incident is incorrect, though at the time, we did report that MJF stood outside the locker room and asked for permission to enter. MJF believes that the situation was likely exaggerated by wrestling news sources looking for attention, and that despite any animosity, he can still appreciate the talent of other wrestlers. He even went as far as to praise the upcoming match between Britt Baker and Mercedes Moné at Wembley on August 25th, calling it an exciting event. MJF concluded by reiterating that just because he works with people, he doesn't have to like them, but the self-professed scumbag is ready to put this matter in the rearview mirror. In an effort to elevate his friend The Miz back into the limelight, R-Truth arranged for a match for the A-lister against Bron in the second half of Raw. Instead of a title match with Bron Breakker, as Miz will have hoped, R-Truth's mishap put Miz in the ring with Bronson Reed, though the former WWE champion didn't back down. Miz countered Reed's offense with his veteran knowledge, but his it kicks were met with a Death Valley driver, and Reed hit the tsunami for the win. Reed was ready to hit the move again after the match, but Truth intercepted and ate 6 tsunamis on Miz's behalf, becoming the second victim of Reed's assault on the Raw locker room. The segment ended with Adam Pearce berating Reed, and a suspension was mentioned, but right now, no disciplinary measures related to this week's Raw have been announced. What did you make of Reed's actions on Raw, and where do you see him going next? Let us know below. The main event saw an Intercontinental title rematch between Bron Breakker and Sami Zayn, but this time it was 2 out of 3 falls. Zayn turned things around after Bron's early offense, and a haluva kick put the Canadian in the lead, but Breakker equalized after the final commercial break with 2 spears. Zayn almost won with a crucifix, but it didn't keep the champion down, and one final mid-air spear gave Bron the win and a successful defense of his title. This was the best match of their 3 encounters and gives Bron a good springboard into his next feud, as WWE remain firmly behind him. Despite their on-screen differences, Sami Zayn can't help but recognize the potential of Bron Breakker and made that clear to the fans in Texas after Raw. He said, "You have to give respect to the Intercontinental Champion and in all probability the future face of WWE, Bron Breakker. I really don't have time to say. If I had to say anything, it would just be that I've been coming to the city of Austin, Texas for a very, very long time, long before I was even in WWE. Back when I was wrestling at the Mohawk in Texas, this city was a wrestling town back then, and it's still a wrestling town right now. If you don't believe me, just look around. We sold every single seat of this building out." As for where Sami goes from here, that remains to be seen, but do you agree with his assessment of Breakker? Who should he go against next? Give your thoughts in the comments. After the Wyatt Six made their in-ring debut last week, speculation ran rife about the group's future and who could be targeted next by the sinister yet compelling faction. Before setting its sights on Chad Gable, the group had seemingly interfered with Pat McAfee's show, and the Raw commentator has once again become a focal point of this storyline. During the latest episode of Pat's show, the lights went out while McAfee was speaking, prompting his co-hosts to wonder if the Wyatt Six might be involved. When the lights returned, McAfee's microphone was the only one that failed to work, while the mics of his cohorts functioned completely normally. McAfee has several microphones on his desk, none of which were working, and he eventually found a functional mic and speculated the cause of this bizarre outrage. Pat wondered if it was a simple power outage or a deliberate attack from the Wyatt Six, and theorized that his co-host's equipment was powered by an emergency generator. If Pat's mics were connected to the main power supply, this would explain why his mic went out and others didn't, but like we said, this isn't the first time the faction has got to his show. This interruption made it very apparent that the Wyatt Six might just come after McAfee on Raw in the coming weeks, so we'll have to see what will become of him in the end. Speaking of the Wyatts, another VHS tape was played on Raw that saw Bo Dallas sitting in front of a TV, reflecting on the Wyatt Six debut in the same place where the original Wyatt family debuted years ago. Bo heard voices from inside the TV from his alter ego Uncle Howdy, who congratulated him but urged him to continue the work, hinting that this is just the beginning of big plans. Interestingly, some of the imagery used came from the final episode of the Firefly Funhouse, and Bo spoke of opening doors and how his work must continue. With that in mind, many fans thought that the She entry in Uncle Howdy's online journal during the build to Wyatt Six that spoke of she who must choose to walk through the door. This entry was dated to January 2023, which was the last time fans saw Alexa Bliss on TV for WWE, and could it be that she is Bliss who is ready to return with the Wyatt Six? Bliss's connection to Bray Wyatt is well documented, and while Bliss hasn't been seen in a long time, that could soon change, judging by this video. As the voices took over, Dallas seemed more driven than ever, saying, "My life for you," and shouting it out loud as the segment came to a close. What are your thoughts on Bo Dallas being urged to continue the work by Uncle Howdy after a successful in-ring debut on Raw last week? Sound off in the comments. Now, Damage Control turned their backs on Bayley after the veteran won the Women's Royal Rumble match earlier this year, but the role model got her revenge at WrestleMania 40. On WWE's grandest stage, Bayley won the women's title from Io Sky, and Dakota Kai claimed that the group was better off without Bayley and that she was holding them back. Well, ahead of this week's Raw, Kai did an unboxing on Instagram and received a custom controller for the Valorant video game, but the Wyatt Six theme could be heard in the background. Could Dakota Kai be the faction's next target? Would you like to see Nikki Cross, aka Abby the Witch? We know to never count anything out when it comes to Uncle Howdy's group. On Raw, Io Sky and Kairi Sane faced Zoe Stark and Shayna Baszler in a #1 contenders match, while Alba Fire, Isla Dawn, and Sonya Deville watched from ringside. They weren't the only ones watching, as former women's champion Candice Michelle was shown in the crowd as the match got underway. Damage Control took control of Baszler with some double team tactics, and Sane showed extra aggression against the woman she went to war with in NXT. Zayn and Sky did a good job falling into the babyface roles, while Baszler and Stark are natural heels, though Stark did super kick fire at ringside after Sky avoided the move. Io was set to win before Isla Dawn interfered to cause the DQ, and the champions took out both teams to end the segment standing tall. The result wasn't ideal, but all of the action leading up to it was entertaining and made both teams look strong, with a triple threat tag team title match looking increasingly likely. SmackDown now, and Jacob Fatu was not at last week's show as he's selling the effects of what transpired at SummerSlam when he seemingly got hurt during a table spot with Cody Rhodes. PW Insider has given a positive update on Fatu, saying he is expected to return to in-ring action by the end of this month, but did not disclose specifics regarding the injury in question. It's been reported that this injury is an angle, as WWE didn't want Fatu and Roman Reigns to collide at SummerSlam, and this injury kept the two from coming to blows. If so, it appears that WWE is saving a Reigns vs. Fatu feud for down the line, and will continue to follow Fatu's status for updates. Back to Raw, and Odyssey Jones had to wait for close to a year and a half before bursting onto the scene on last week's Raw, where he single-handedly took down the Final Testament. Jones made the save when the New Day were attacked by their enemies following a match with AOP, and Jones was in action on this week's Raw against upstart star Vincent Winey. Winey, who is training at the Performance Center, is also known as the partner of Cora Jade, but no amount of advice from the NXT star could save him from the beating Jones delivered. Jones squashed Winey and got the pinfall, and as he celebrated after the match with Kofi Kingston and Xavier Woods, the trio were confronted by the Final Testament. Cross again tried to drive a wedge in the New Day, claiming that Kofi brought Jones in as a replacement for Xavier Woods, not Big E as some believe. Woods again said Cross's attempts to split the group wouldn't work, and Kofi threw out a challenge, a 6-man tag for next week's Raw with The New Day and Jones versus Cross and AOP. This earned a loud ovation from the WWE Universe, and while Jones may not be an official member of The New Day, it's hard to shake the feeling he's being brought in to replace Big E. On commentary, Pat McAfee called Jones Big O, a name that Michael Cole confirmed, and on Twitter before Raw, that was a name Jones also used. Whether that becomes his official name or not remains to be seen. Fans will also have to wait and see if he becomes an official member of The New Day. Do you like this potential new name for Jones, or is it too much of a replacement of Big E? What did you make of his in-ring debut, and are you excited for next week's match? Sound off below. Last year, Hall of Famer Kevin Nash previously blasted LA Knight for being a ripoff of The Rock and Steve Austin, and despite controversy, doubled down and had no intention to apologize. In response, LA Knight mentioned that he hasn't had a direct conversation with Kevin Nash about their issues, and said at the time that he wasn't going to think too much on it. With that said, Knight did accuse Nash of trying to take food off his table, and the two recently had their long-awaited face-to-face earlier this month at SummerSlam. Speaking on his Click This podcast, Nash talked about his interaction with Knight and said, "I said, so you finally getting the over tonight?" And he goes, "Something like that. And then we talked, and because he's working with Logan Paul, I just asked him how it was to work with Paul, you know? Is he a natural? Is he paint by numbers?" Nash confirmed that Knight offered his opinion on wrestling the social media influencer, but he didn't feel it was his place to share Knight's opinions on Paul publicly. As far as the previous beef between them, Nash said there's no ill will between the two now, and that their past conflict didn't come up in conversation at SummerSlam. Nash also clarified his previous point, stating that his ripoff claim was not an attempt to harm Knight's career, but he was just sharing his opinion about the wrestler. He explained that while his comments might have been taken out of context by others, he's more interested in contributing positively to the business rather than causing conflict. The Hall of Famer wants to see WWE succeed and isn't trying to provoke people. And what's your take on the pair having no heat despite their past remarks? Let us know down below. There were plenty of big stars appearing on this week's Raw, but during the show, it was revealed that Mark Henry was in the crowd with his son Jacob. This was Mark's first appearance for WWE since 2021 and comes after he parted ways with AEW earlier this year after a 3-year run. As for Jacob, fans may get used to seeing him, as the amateur wrestler recently signed an NIL contract with WWE that could lead him to becoming a superstar down the line. Ahead of a tag team match, Ivy Nile ran into Maxine Dupree backstage and asked her to join her faction at ringside, but Maxine opted to stay with Alpha Academy instead, and a disappointed Nile walked away. Alpha Academy and American Made faced off this week, and the match saw a serious botch when Akira Tozawa attempted to dive out through the ropes, only for his feet to get caught. That meant he got sent straight down, and he didn't get the distance on the jump and wasn't far enough to hit his opponents. Being at ringside would also prove hazardous to Maxine Dupree's health, as after turning down Ivy Nile earlier in the night, she suffered a beatdown from her now former friend. The distraction caused by Nile ultimately cost Alpha Academy the match, and the Creed scored the win, and after the match, Nile confirmed she's aligned with the Creed brothers and seemingly joined American Made. This was a match full of action, and we're just grateful that things didn't go worse for Akira Tozawa, considering that worrying botch. Over a year ago, Sheamus forged the Brawling Brutes with Pete Dunne and Ridge Holland, but when the Celtic Warrior disappeared from TV last year, the group fell apart. A few weeks ago, Sheamus came out to help Dunne with Bronson Reed, but he was shoved away by the former Butch, and the two former allies have been feuding ever since. On Raw, Sheamus addressed his feud with Dunne before Ludwig Kaiser interrupted, and as the pair addressed their history, Dunne attacked Sheamus from behind. Pete then assaulted Sheamus using a shillelagh and hit his hand with the weapon, seemingly injuring his former friend and making this grudge feud even more personal.